they'll want an update. So we'll
running
bring
up
in
the price
Dylan
on these
to the studio. Welcome to the stream. How you doing?
Thank you for joining, Dylan. Dylan, it's great to have you on the show finally. Long overdue. You've given us a lot of
first-time caller.
lot of great pointers. But anyways, we were going to cover this story, so thank you for being able to hop on short notice.
Yeah,
do you want to give a quick intro and then we'll dive into the story just so people have some context?
Yeah, sure. I'm Dylan, founder of Crypto the Game, which is an interactive crypto survival game. Think HQ Trivia, where I worked for the Rise and Fall meets Survivor or Squid Game or Hunger Games. We've had a couple viral seasons. And before that, I was Jordy's head of marketing over at Party Round and Capital. So we go way back. And yeah,
Way
excited
back.
to be here.
Way back. Awesome. Why don't you give some context on your background as an amateur but successful art collector as well? Because we're talking
I've
about art
kind
today.
of always been an obsessive collector of things. Growing up, I collected Beanie Babies, Pokemon cards, baseball cards, sports memorabilia, always collecting. Fast forward to, I don't know, probably like 2017, 2018, my wife and I moved into our first apartment together, had very sterile white walls, and decided that I guess like collecting art would be a good way to kind of scratch that itch of collecting and be something that we could do together. So kind of just started as something we could do together. I kind of browsed Instagram. Back then, there was like a much more intuitive kind of like explore tab. You were surfaced kind of like art if you followed artists. And pretty much just cold DM this artist, also coincidentally named Jordy Kerwick, whose art immediately spoke to me. Sent him a DM. He didn't have any gallery representation. He made, buying a piece and commissioning a painting as easy as like texting with a friend. I think the art market historically has been so hard to get into for young collectors, and there was like zero friction in the way that we went about it. I think we got a little lucky in the sense that he eventually like blew up, got kind of like gallery representation, then tier one gallery representation. He was breaking records, in similar auctions to what we're about to discuss. And kind of because of that, I don't know, I almost like made a name for myself in this like Instagram art community. I've kind of just like catapulted into the art collecting scene.
How's the P&L though? On paper, I'm sure the returns are fantastic. Do you ever sell or do you just buy?
I don't know. I just buy. I don't know. Everyone always asks kind of because of that, like what to buy and how to go about it. And my advice is always just to buy what you love and buy what speaks to you. And it kind of sounds like, pretty simple advice, but anytime I've looked at a piece or like had a recommendation from a friend or a fellow collector on a piece that was going to be a great investment or was going to do really well, has never worked out. And I've always kind of regretted buying and having on my wall and kind of like looking at it versus the stuff that we do buy and collect and kind of like do it for the right reasons and have always been kind of like rewarded on paper basically for those early bets.
Yeah. Great. Well, let's talk about this story, and then I'd love to get your update on kind of the broader art market. So we'll read through it. So the Journal covered it this morning, but the Mondrian sells for $47.6 million. Christie's Modern Art Sales kick off a week-long series of art auctions that will gauge the art market's strengths amid broader economic uncertainty. People are wondering, will art values soar or flop, or in general, what the liquidity will be like.
So this was at the kind of low end of the estimate. The 1922 work composition with large red, plain, bluish gray, yellow, black, and blue was expected by Christie's to sell for between 40 million and 50 million, but only one bidder emerged, and it sold quickly for $41 million or 47.6 with the auction house's fees. The work still ranks as the third highest price ever paid for the artist, but the record remains $51 million paid 3 years ago for Mondrian's composition number 2. Both examples feature a large red square, which the auction house hoped would help because collectors tend to pay a premium for Mondrian's spare abstracts that contained cherry hues, said Alex Rotter, Christie's president. Red always helps, simple as it is, because it's a color that people like, said Rotter.
There you go. That's what Dylan's talking about.
Never buy brown. Never buy brown. It doesn't sell.
Yeah. It's also particularly small. It's only about like 2 feet by 2 feet or something. And so I saw on X, Bornosaur, an NFT profile picture says this tiny Mondrian just sold for $47.5 million last night without anyone batting an eye. And yet people think AAA natively digital grails are overpriced at 2 to 3 million, much, much higher. Kind of saying, hey, maybe we should pump the market of the Bored Apes. Let's get Bored Apes in the conversation.
Yeah, let's get it back in the conversation. Anyways, were you surprised at how this got priced, Dylan? Were you following it at all, or what?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty in the overall economy, right? So, I mean, you would expect that like art kind of oscillates, but yeah, I mean, do you follow this, or like how do you even track the overall art market these days?
Yeah, I mean, it is so similar to venture investing. I know you kind of joked about it at the top, but especially when you look at emerging markets, and if you buy from their studio in the same way that I did with Jordy Kerwick, it's basically getting into a friends and family round, at least with kind of like living artists and artists that still have gallery representation. If they do basically sign with an up and coming gallery, that's the equivalent of a seed round. And then by the time they do get that kind of like tier one Gagosian level representation, is the equivalent to an Andreessen or a tier one fund, like backing them in like a growth stage round. I think you referenced that kind of like Mondrian record that was set 3 years ago. There were emerging artists, everyone basically like at the time of ZERP, like everything was going crazy. And we saw that both in, basically across every single market, art not withstanding. So I think the way that I personally judge it is basically just off of the information that I receive. In 2021, 2022, I was reaching out to galleries kind of cold and being told that there were wait lists and the deal flow was basically like very, very hard to come by. Fast forward to, a few years from then, galleries were kind of like reaching out to me, hey, I know you were initially interested in this artist a few years ago. Here's all of this work that's available and willing to offer discounts. And that immediately signals to me that, times aren't good for galleries. But I do think that the best way of predicting like how these auctions are going to go are based on basically how New York Art Week goes. And that was this past week, which was kind of headlined by Frieze, but they also had TEFAF as well as NADA, which is kind of like the more emerging art fair. And from what I can tell from everyone that I've spoken to, that was kind of like on the ground, it was a much more optimistic New York Art Week than years past. Gagosian sold a $3 million sculpture on the floor. They sold out, tons of booths that were sold out kind of like on day one.
Love a $3 million sculpture selling on day one. That's great news.
Yeah, so I think like that usually sets the tone for how these kind of like auctions go. There's been a ton of buzz around the Bass House. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Bass House, but it was a commissioned
we both are, but can you explain it for the fans who might not be?
Sure. Yeah. It's an architecturally significant home in Texas that these two kind of like well-known collectors commissioned a very famous architect to design this mid-century modern house in Texas, specifically designed to house their collection of Rothkos and Warhols and, pretty much every big name. They are auctioning off the collection, which everyone is in our market is very surprised by, because you would think you commission this home to specifically house this collection. It should eventually become a museum. And I think that kind of like bodes well for what they think and what a lot of people think is going to be a lot of liquidity kind of like heading into these auctions. Having said all of that, I would say if we had this conversation like a week or two ago, I think it would be a lot more pessimistic or concerned. But given the very like recent kind of like positive news and kind of like market turnaround, I think there's some buzz kind of heading into tonight.
I have a follow-up question. I mean, the size seems significant. I feel like there's probably a sweet spot for the scale of a particular. You mentioned that sculpture. We're recording not too far from the Broad. You walk in, there's this massive Jeff Koons balloon animal. I walked in when I was in New York once. I walked into Jordan Wolfson. I don't even know if it's a sculpture, but it's like a performance art piece. I don't know if you're familiar with Jordan Wolfson, but it's like this crazy interactive like machine that has motors and stuff. And at a certain scale, it becomes like, how do you even collect that unless you have like a museum to put it in?
That's who's buying it is the institution.
It has to be
like
the
I would
institutions.
imagine, the $3 million sculpture that Gagosian sold that I mentioned was a Koons, and the Broad bought their Koons sculpture from Gagosian, and I would venture to guess that the bidder or the person that bought this $3 million sculpture was an institution looking to build out their collection for the museum.
Yeah, is there a
is
different
Christie's? I mean, I'm curious. Not to switch gears too much, but I'm curious. Is Christie's even slotting in NFTs this week at all, or are they so over it that they're not even?
Because it was a big thing like 3 years ago.
Yeah,
right?
I mean Sotheby's. You got to give Christie's.
Sotheby's did the Beeple.
Yeah, you have to give them some credit for moving quickly and getting NFTs into these auctions early. But I'm curious if they're doing that now.
So this week is kind of like the hero week of every year, and there's no way that in like a 21st century like masterpiece auction you'll see an NFT, but I do think they are still accepting crypto and selling NFTs. All the major auction houses kind of have daily auctions that they're running. You probably won't see a Beeple in something as kind of like highly publicized as this week's auctions, but I definitely think they're still selling digital art for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one NFT that I think belongs in the conversation. Have you heard of this Moxie Marlinspike NFT? So he's the founder of Signal, and during the NFT boom, he wrote a very technical deep dive on kind of some of the flaws with the way NFTs were structured in that he basically designed an NFT that displayed differently on OpenSea than in a Phantom wallet, than in an Ethereum wallet. And he was making this commentary around the importance of platforms and the role that a firm like OpenSea plays in the art market, and how like the code is not purely on chain because it can be represented differently in different places. And it was kind of this like, it was kind of a top signal at the time. He wrote it when NFTs were super hot. And obviously he came to it from a very engineering mindset perspective. And I think that even though he never sold it and it doesn't have any value and it never like minted in the traditional sense, it is an NFT and it has this historical provenance and this story around it that I think as we look back on the NFT boom, we could remember that particular story as an interesting commentary on the entire industry that could actually drive the value up. So I was considering buying it from him for a while, but I didn't have the guts to throw out an actual price.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I do think similar to how there's paintings and there's sculptures and there's basically all different forms of, there's mixed media art. Like I do think digital art definitely has staying power.
Totally.
Probably just like in the more experimental guys that you were talking about. And then just to quickly touch on like size as being a blocker.
Sure.
I think once you're talking about these like, 8-9 figure pieces, it's almost always someone that can house or store either in their museum or in their home, like a massive piece. But just for like the everyday collector or someone that might be listening to this, like personally speaking, like I have gigantic canvases that are still rolled up that I have absolutely zero wall space for, but that is like an addiction and a problem. And I do think that, buy for the size that feels right to your home and something that you actually want to hang.
Well, we're moving into a new studio very shortly, and we're certainly going to have some wall space. So we'll only charge you a small storage fee.
I'll pump my bags
as family and friends. Anyways, great to have you on. Come back on again soon.
Thanks so much. We'll talk more.
And let us know how things shake out this week in the art market.
Cool. Talk soon.
Later.